Hi, I'm Capt Frank Lanier, a retired Coast Guard officer and SAMS Accredited Marine Surveyor with over 40 years of experience in the maritime and diving industry. I've amassed literally thousands of photos of all the bad things I've found on boats during my career as a Marine Surveyor. So what we're going to do today is take a look at some of my favorites. We're going to take a look at each picture. We're going to discuss why they're evil, and we're going to discuss what you need to do to correct them. So hop in, buckle up, keep your arms and legs inside the car at all times as we take a carnival-like ride tour through the cavalcade of owner-induced perversions that I like to call Capt Frank's Sea Chest of Horrors. Sea Chest of Horrors. Need a tuna tower but just can't justify raiding little Jimmy's college fund for one of those custom fabrications? No worries. The solution is as close as the nearest thrift store or assisted living community. Take a good look at the photo and you'll see a sight that proves Mother Necessity can at times be the root of all evil. The owner did state that in addition to the obvious physical danger of using this thrift store walker mini tower, anyone riding up top was prone to shouting stuff like, "You kids get off my lawn," or "back in my day," or even "Corn Pop was a bad dude." Anchors should always be attached to chain rode using a proper anchor shackle, which your anchor shackles are going to be more bell-shaped or horseshoe-shaped rather than a standard shackle, which is kind of straight along both sides. This shape gives them more movement and freedom to twist and turn. But I can hear the owner saying, "Now what's to be done when I don't have no shackle and the chandler is so far away? What I need is something to fix this here anchor to my chain pronto so me and Ethel can get out and enjoy the water." While this picture is a sadly comical example of how not to connect an anchor, the more subtle part many don't know is that a spring snap link like the one shown here has no business in your anchor rod at all, no matter how it's installed. They're weaker than an anchor shackle or chain connecting link, which is actually the proper choice of connecting shots of chain together. Okay, so what's the big fuss about fuses anyway? They're so delicate and they just fail when you need them the most, right? If only there was some way we could substitute them with something more robust, a less costly alternative, but one easy enough to get hold of in a pinch. Take these custom fit bolts shown in the fuse block that you're seeing in front of you right now. These babies won't let you down. They'll pretty much last forever, although that's a trade-off when considering the fire and possible death they can cause. I see stuff like this all the time as a Marine surveyor, and the sad part is the owner thought he was doing something that was just okay, by sticking bolts in the place of fuses. And I'll give you a bonus troubleshooting tip. If you've got a fuse that constantly blows, the fuse blowing should be considered the symptom of a problem, not the problem itself. In this case, the proper response is, again, to find out why the fuse is blowing rather than simply continuing to replace it. The solution is definitely not replacing it with a larger size fuse or with bolts like you see here. I've always kind of thought that running lights have a touch of the Christmas holiday feel to them with their, red and green glow, but, I never imagined I'd see it taken to this extreme. Navigation lights have stringent approval requirements, particularly with regards to luminous intensity and cutoff angles. Let's play the devil's advocate here and ignoring the obvious reason why you can't use two giant Christmas bulbs for your running lights. Let's just discuss what's wrong with this picture from a technical aspect. For starters, the intensity of the lights is insufficient. Side lights have to be visible for at least 1 nautical mile for boats less than 12 meters and at least 2 nautical miles for larger boats. Then there's the arc of visibility thing. Side lights must be visible from dead ahead to 112.5 degrees aft on either side. These are pretty much visible 360 degrees. Also must not interfere with the operator's ability to maintain a proper lookout, which is why you can't see your side lights from the helm. Well, properly installed ones anyway. Finally, they have to be U.S. Coast Guard approved. This is obviously not the case here. However, some boat owners unwittingly place themselves in this same category of misuse. Navigation lights are approved as a whole, which means that both the fixture and the bulb used by the manufacturer are evaluated to ensure they meet all the requirements. So if, for example, an owner swaps out their old incandescent navigation light bulbs with newer LED bulbs, now it's unknown if the fixture still meets the luminous intensity of the original combination. Okay, so the problem shown here is not so much an installation gone bad, but rather an installation that isn't finished. The photo shows an exhaust outlet for a generator, one that, according to the owner, failed a number of years before and had long been since removed from the vessel. Rather than properly capping it or removing the now unused through hull, the owner just simply chose to do nothing. The resulting hole created by the open through hull now effectively reduces the vessel's freeboard, which is the safety margin against sinking, from roughly 3 feet to 3 inches. You know what? There ain't no doubt about it. It sucks being cold, and if you enjoy winter boating, thoughts invariably turn to some options to keeping your boat nice and warm. You know, marine diesel or LPG heaters are expensive, but if you're a boater on a budget and you've got a little bit of ingenuity behind you and innovation, you can find some good deals at those big box stores, just like the owner did here. Plus, who doesn't like the warmth pumped out by the flesh-searing, cheery red glow of a wood-burning stove? If you take a good look at this picture, you'll see that the stove is suspended by chains. So I guess the cabin gets the full benefit of 360 degrees of radiant heat. This also gives it kind of a quasi-gimlet effect. An added benefit should the owner maybe want to use the top as a makeshift stove to whip up some fried chicken. When I conduct a marine survey on a boat, it shouldn't be any surprise that the propane or LPG system gets a healthy dose of scrutiny, as it is one of the few systems on board that can actually blow the boat up. So this picture that you're looking at now is it's a photo of a LPG supply hose connection at the rear of a stove. You know, I looked at it and the line tied to it was kind of a head scratcher for me for a moment till the owner came up behind me and explained what was going on. You know, he said, that fitting leaks. And I could smell gas every time I use the stove, and we all know that ain't good. So I fiddled around with it. You know, I'm handy that way. And I found out when I pulled up on the hose and put pressure on the fitting at a certain spot, it stopped leaking. I took a spare piece of line, tied it up, and man, problem solved. Well, you know, it goes without saying, but here we go. Your LPG system is one of the few systems on board, as we discussed earlier, that can usher you into eternity via a bomb-sized ball of exploding flame. There should be no leaks, and if you find one or you think one exists, immediately shut off the fuel and don't use the system until it is fully inspected by a competent marine technician. A pressure or leak down test for the LPG system is something that's easily performed, and it should be conducted on a regular basis. The propane system should have a gauge installed, and the purpose of that gauge is not to tell you how much fuel you got, although it will do that. The purpose of that gauge is so you can conduct this leak down test. And the way you conduct a leak down test is, with the appliances off, you open the tank supply valve and remote shutoff or a solenoid valve if you've got one. So you're pressurizing the line from the tank all the way to the stove or the heater, whatever the system is. Then you leave the remote solenoid open and you close the tank supply valve. Observe the pressure gauge reading and let it set for about 3 minutes. And the pressure should remain the same at least for 3 minutes, constant or remain the same for 3 minutes. A drop in pressure, of course, indicates a leak in the system, at which point the entire system should be checked for leaks. Batteries are expensive, especially the good heavy-duty deep cycle marine ones. They also need to be charged, and battery chargers ain't cheap either. What if there was a way a creative person could just skip the middleman, so to speak, and supply all that DC power right to the consumer? Why have a house battery bank to power stuff when you can just hook up the battery charger directly to the battery switch and let it power up the electronics? This is what we're looking at here. The 2 yellow circles you see are where the battery charger alligator clips are connected to the battery switch. And the other side of that, well, that's going right to the battery charger itself. I was chuckling when I saw this, and the owner, man, he was so proud that he had figured out how to do this stuff. So I said, well, what about when you're away from the dock? How do you use electronics when you're away from a dock? He said, well, that's the beauty of it. He said, The solution is just to simply fire up the generator while everything's, while you're underway, and power up everything, with the battery charger, to using it to provide DC to the electronics. It's obvious there's a multitude of problems with this approach. One being, relying on the unstable DC power provided by a cheap automotive style battery charger, which, can damage your electronics, by the way, to the use of spring clips or alligator clips to make the connections. None of your battery connections or battery charger connections should be used using a spring-loaded alligator clip or spring clip. Cracked composite or plastic through hulls are a common problem, as a walk in pretty much any boatyard will bear out. UV damage, ultraviolet light damage, is the main culprit, and while different brands of composite through hulls vary widely in their susceptibility to UV damage, some are so poorly made that I've seen them fail within a couple of years. Composite through hull fittings typically fail where the body meets the outer flange. This results in a crack or even total failure, both of which you can see in the photo here. The one on the left, you can see the crack is just starting, and the one on the right, the flange is completely broken and missing. Once the flange falls off, there's nothing left to keep that through hull in place, at which point the through hull can be pulled inside the boat. What this does, as you can see in this photo here, is that it reduces the boat's freeboard, which is the margin of protection it has against sinking. In this particular case, the through hull is roughly 3 inches above the boot stripe, which means it's probably around 5 inches above waterline. So what this has done is effectively reduced the boat's freeboard from a couple of feet to 5 inches, meaning the boat now only has to settle a few inches before it can start taking on water and possibly sinking. Even if the through hull is located well above waterline, if it fails, it can still be a huge problem. Take, for example, if the through hull is a discharge for the bilge pump. Well, and it pulls in to the hull, and the bilge pump starts pumping, it's just going to cycle water back into the boat as it pumps, and it keeps pumping and cycling until eventually the boat settles above the through hull that's failed, and then it sinks. In addition to cracks, another indication of UV damage to composite through hull is deterioration. And that typically manifests itself in a white chalky residue on the through hull flange itself. An easy way to check for that is to take a dark rag and wipe around the through hull. A white chalky residue on the rag indicates UV damage and that the through hull is starting to deteriorate. If you find one cracked composite through hull, chances are the remaining ones are the same age and similarly prone to failure. A good strategy at that point would be to implement a replacement schedule for the remaining composite through hulls to head off any future failures. It took a moment for me to realize exactly what it was that I didn't like about this through hull installation. At first, I thought it was the use of a gate valve. Gate valves are prone to failure and not typically recommended for use on through hulls below the waterline. And then I looked at it a little closer, and I realized, you know what? There's no hose clamps installed here. In fact, there's not even any hose. That through hull, seacock, and pipe on the other side are all joined together using foam pipe insulation and PVC glue. It goes without saying, although this picture proves that it needs to be said anyway, through hulls and seacocks need to utilize marine grade hose suitable for use below the waterline, and the hose needs to be clamped at each end with marine grade stainless steel or titanium hose clamps. What we have here is your basic leaky fuel valve. As any similarly conscientious boater would agree, you can't have all that fuel leaking in the bilge. So let's just set a bucket under it until we can figure this thing out. Oh, and never mind the live AC shore power cord splice connected with twist-on wire nuts, no less, that's soaking in that bucket full of fuel. The recommendation here to the somewhat surprised boat owner was 1, fix the valve so the fuel doesn't leak into the bilge. 2, get rid of the bucket full of fuel. And 3, make a proper connection for the AC shore power cord. Just a quick note on connections. You should never use the twist-on wire nuts that you see here. You know, the kind you'll find at Home Depot, Lowe's, or any other residential big box stores. The reason being wire nuts can fall off due to vibration you'd have on the boats. And when they do that, they leave a exposed, energized conductor that can shock someone or arc and spark while it's bouncing around and cause a fire or even an explosion. The majority of onboard fires can be traced to faulty or improperly installed electrical systems. This photo proves no weekend projects are too complicated when the consulting firm of J.D. and P. Lopez Incorporated are employed. Problems with this homegrown AC power installation include the use of non-standard wiring, in this case cut extension cords, no circuit breakers, no GFCI, ground fault circuit interrupt protection, numerous electrical tape joints, and, should some unfortunate crew member start doing the electric boogaloo, no way to secure power to the system other than dashing to the dock and unplugging the cord from the shoreside pedestal. Your AC shore power system should always have a primary breaker installed within 10 feet of where the AC power enters the vessel. This is why you'll often see a main breaker for the AC system in the cockpit locker near the inlet for the shore power plug. The reason being is once power comes into the boat and you have the breaker right there, it then allows the builder to install a wire run from the breaker to the main breaker panel, which in many cases would exceed the 10-foot requirement. The system must also have a reverse polarity indicator installed at the main AC breaker panel. The American Boat and Yacht Council, or ABYC, recommendations specify that outlets in the galley, the head, engine compartment, and weather decks be protected by GFCI outlets. My personal recommendation is that all outlets be protected by GFCI, since extension cords leading from an outlet that is not protected can be used in the areas that require the protection. If an existing receptacle box isn't deep enough to accept a GFCI outlet and it's not easily changed, another option is installation of a new box of adequate size with the GFCI unit near the main panel. The existing circuits can then be downstream fed from the new box, providing each of them with GFCI protection. What, I hear you say, can possibly go wrong with cockpit drains? The water disappears and everybody's happy, right? Well, let's say your boat was manufactured in 1990. A realistic example is there are still plenty of vessels from that era out and about. If the cockpit drain hoses are original, and there's a good chance they are, it means the safety of you and your vessel hinges on a 32-year-old piece of hose. Hose, like everything else, has a limited lifespan and should be inspected and replaced on a regularly scheduled basis per the manufacturer's recommendation. Lacking that, a general rule of thumb is hoses that are greater than 10 years of age should be replaced regardless of appearance. Swivels, such as the one shown here, are installed between the anchor and rode to prevent twisting. However, many boaters are unaware that they can be installed incorrectly. The jaw fitting of the swivel must be attached to the chain, not the anchor shank, as shown in this photo, with the swivel eye attached to the anchor shank utilizing an anchor shackle. Both of these steps reduce binding and possible failure as the vessel shears at anchor. The swivel itself should be drop forged, not screwed, riveted, or welded together, and it should be the largest size that fits the chain link without binding. No amount of pumps can overcome a bilge choked with trash and debris. Periodic bilge cleaning is a fact of life with older vessels, but even new boats can be littered with wood shavings, bits of fiberglass, gobs of adhesives, and other construction trash that can plug up a pump. Oil in the bilge is just as bad or even worse. It combines with dirt to form sludge, a thick gooey material that can clog pumps and prevent automatic floats from operating properly. The takeaway here is to avoid that sinking feeling. Always keep your bilges clean. Backup bilge pumps are always a good idea. However, there are a few installation points to consider to ensure they work properly when needed. In this picture, the backup pump float switch is located a suitable height above the primary pump switch. However, the backup pump itself is located at the same level as the primary bilge pump. Backup bilge pumps should ideally be mounted and configured to turn on when bilge water level reaches around 4 to 6 inches above the cut-on point for the primary pump. The takeaway here is that you want your backup pump to be mounted or elevated a little bit above the normal accumulation of bilge water. If your backup pump is mounted at the same level as your primary bilge pump, as shown on this photo, then it can become clogged or seized from lack of use, in which case the backup bilge pump would fail to operate when needed. Spring is a hectic time, particularly in the boatyard as folks scurry about to get their boat ready for the coming season. The devil's in the details during spring commissioning, and nothing helps reduce slip-ups and senior moments like a detailed checklist. This photo shows one check that fell by the wayside prior to the vessel's launch: tightening the hose clamps for the engine raw water intake hose, which had been removed while winterizing the engine the previous fall. So what we got here is a cutover / fuse box for an AC generator. This was another find that gave me that, something ain't quite right, but I can't put my finger on it feeling. It took me about 30 seconds to realize that those nice shiny fuses were in fact pieces of copper pipe cut to fit into the fuse holders. I remember my grandpa used to do something similar at his house. He'd put a penny inside or underneath one of those glass fuses there. He used to think it was just A-OK until it almost burned his house down. So the lesson here is don't put pieces of copper pipe in your fuse holders. Here, sailorman ingenuity has once again reared its hoary old head in efforts to sink yet another vessel. The handle of the bilge manifold pictured here broke off and was replaced with that venerable standby lock and pliers. Aside from the damage inflicted to the valve stem, chances are they'll be borrowed by some crew member for another important task and never return, a fact that's most likely discovered when the valve needs to be closed in a hurry. Gate valves, like the one shown here, are not recommended for use on board to begin with, particularly below the waterline. Their internal mechanisms are prone to corrosion-induced failure, and they give no visual indication of whether they're open or closed, as does a true seacock, a requirement of ABYC. Worse still, the valve can fail to completely close due to trash or debris trapped underneath the gate, allowing water to enter the vessel even after being closed. This vessel sank while unattended at the dock a few months later, in part because a combination of trash and corrosion prevented the gate valve from closing properly. The damaged valve had been recommended for replacement during this survey that I performed, as well as the previous survey 2 years earlier. If the handle of your through-hull seacock is damaged or missing, play it safe and repair it properly.